This is Victor Lustig, or what he was famously known for. Victor was a famous crook. He was known for selling the Eiffel Tower. Yes, the famous Eiffel Tower in Paris. But not only did he sell it one time, but two. Believe it or not, selling the Eiffel Tower wasn't even his greatest con. Lustig even conned the lethal gangster Al Capone and lived to tell the tale. Oh, the 5'7" aristocrat was as refined as they came. One Secret Service agent even described him as the smoothest con man to have ever lived. So, let's delve deep into the life of Count Victor Lustig, a man who carved out at least 47 aliases for himself. He was everything from a Broadway producer, a rabbi, a priest, a womanizer, and even a prison escapee. A character so shrouded in mystery that even today no one can tell his true identity. He was so good, and he knew it, that he even wrote us the 10 Commandments for Con Men. So, let's get started. Born on January 4th, 1890, with a silver spoon in his mouth, anyone unfortunate enough to come into contact with adult Lustig could tell he was of pure nobility and upbringing. As he often claimed, his family owned several European castles, and his father, Ludwig, was once the burgomaster, mayor of Hostine in what is today the Czech Republic. Now, all this was fair and all, but there was one small problem with the Lustigian heritage. It wasn't real. You see, after decades of everyone kissing his boots wherever he went, the truth would later come from an unlikely source. Deep within Alcatraz's walls, classified prison documents would reveal Victor himself described his parents as the poorest of peasant people who raised him in a grim house made of stone. They were so poor that they couldn't even afford to feed him and were forced to abandon him in the care of relatives. He would later drop out of school and run away from home, preferring life on the streets of Europe. By the time he celebrated his 13th birthday, Lustig and the streets were inseparable. During the day, he would beg by the roadside and, at night, would scavenge whatever little food he could find from trash bins. Life was tough, but he was tougher. And as was the trend back then, a career in crime was the most viable option, if not the only one. To say Lustig was a criminal protégé is an understatement. It started with petty crime like pickpocketing and rapidly progressed into burglary. That said, the young count didn't prefer violence. Instead, he let his deck do the fighting, and boy was he good. A master of the sleight of hand, Lustig was rumored to make his deck of cards do everything but talk. By the time he turned 18 in 1908, Victor had left Bohemia and moved to Paris. On top of that, he had also served several sentences in Budapest, Zurich, and Vienna. Some police officers even believed he often got arrested intentionally just to take a vacation. According to Lustig, he sometimes needed some downtime in jail to improve his card skills and finish a book or two. You see, despite having dropped out of school, Lustig was an avid natural learner and knew at least 5 languages. A master of appearances, Lustig knew you had to look good to make any money, and this skill would soon pay off big time. It was now the early 1910s, the period known as the Belle Époque, the Golden Age just before the First World War. The United States of America had emerged as the go-to island, flowing with milk and honey, not to mention beautiful women. Whether it was for the wealth or the women, we don't know, but Victor Lustig was sure as hell among the many Europeans who had set their eyes beyond the Atlantic. But as it so happened, he struck gold even before setting foot in the Promised Land. What was this gold, you ask? Well, the thousands of newly rich and highly gullible first-class passengers aboard transatlantic ships to and from America and France. They were so easy pickings it was like shooting fish in a barrel. Particularly, there was this one ruse he loved playing, and it would pay out every time. After dressing to kill, he would introduce himself among the first-class regulars as an up-and-coming Broadway producer destined for success. Slowly, he would sway them into believing and investing in his fake production company. Throughout the voyage, he would use his charm to captivate his audience, and by the time they realized they had been scammed, the cruise was over and Lustig was aboard another ocean liner. This worked for years until one day, he attempted to scam one passenger of not only his money, but also his girlfriend. Repulsed, the now conscious victim slashed a 2.5-inch cut across his left cheek, leaving him with a lifelong scar. This, on top of the First World War, meant Lustig couldn't no longer carry out his rackets. For a few years, he remained silent until he mysteriously washed up on the shores of New York City, dripped in a silk shirt, fine custom-tailored suit, and a camel hair topcoat. He was now the Count Victor Lustig, reeking of old money and royalty. With a count as your honorary title, you could say it was very easy to make money in the United States. Add on top of this a magical mystery box that could duplicate money, and you might as well say Lustig was as good as a billionaire. But the new aristocrat wasn't taking chances and even enlisted the help of one sidekick, dapper Dan Collins, a former circus lion tamir and death-defying bicycle rider. Together, they were in all manner of stints during the Prohibition days, from selling fakey government stickers for bootleggers to counterfeiting and duplicating money. The show would often begin with Count Lustig striking up a conversation with a successful businessman or gambler. Slowly, he would engineer the conversation towards his aristocratic upbringing, and before you knew it, the potential victim would ask how he was earning his living. Quickly, Lustig would mention a particular family heirloom that duplicated $100 bills. Of course, he then would try as much as possible to steer the conversation away from the topic until the victim literally begged for a demonstration. Softly, Lustig would arrange a meeting where Dapper, posing as his servant, would bring the intricately designed money box about 2 feet long, crafted of mahogany and fitted with sophisticated printing machinery with dials. After ordering drinks, he would explain that all you had to do was place a $100 bill and a blank currency paper inside, turn the crank, and wait 6 hours for the chemical process to do its work. True to that, both Lustig and the victim would open the box to find 2 identical $100 bills. They would even go to a nearby bank to confirm authenticity. Satisfied, the excited buyer would pay anywhere from $10,000 to $50,000 and leave with their prize, which is at least $700,000 in today's money. So how did it work? Did it actually work? Lustig would first go to his bank and withdraw several real $100 bills, meaning the serial numbers would appear sequentially. Using his counterfeiting skills, he would rub off and reapply the last digits of the serial numbers so they were all the same. Next, he would never approach potential buyers about the box. Instead, he would carefully let the conversation trickle down to it. At times, he would employ his sleight of hand to pickpocket someone's wallet before returning it with a, "Hey, you've dropped this." In case you're still wondering, no, the box never worked, and it was only after a couple of hours, usually 6, that most victims found out they had been scammed. But this is where Lustig's stroke of genius showed itself. Because it was basically a scam of a scam, nobody would dare report to the police that they were duped while trying to duplicate national currency, especially not the rich and successful ones who didn't want any police attention. Due to the nature of this approach, just like the ocean liner charade, Lustig moved cities rising and repeating until he scammed the wrong wealthy woman. Billie Mae Schiebel, the owner of a gangster multi-million-dollar prostitution racket. Embarrassed that she had been duped like so, Mae spent weeks relentlessly tracking Lustig from one city to another until she cornered him in a hotel in Chicago. But even she couldn't handle the Count's charms. In a dramatic plot twist, Lustig sweet-talked her, and within hours, she went from anger to pure admiration of the Count's resourcefulness. Mae even became his wife and together ran multiple scams, including others where Lustig pretended to suffer seizures during business meetings. Mind you, this wasn't even his first marriage. Several years earlier, in 1919, the Count had married Roberta, another former victim-turned-wife. Just like Mae, Roberta was so infatuated with him that she stayed even after finding out he wasn't really a Count, but a con man. It was around this time that he also conned the American Saving Bank and made away with at least $30,000 in cash and Liberty bonds. According to the investigator reports, Lustig, now under the name Robert Duval, offered the bank $22,000 in World War I bonds, also known as Liberty bonds, for a ranch. Of course, Victor had no interest in something as immobile as farmland. The real sting was in the side deal, where he sold them an additional $10,000 in bonds for cash to cover his operating expenses. However, on the day of the deal, he used his famous sleight of hand to make away with both the $32,000 worth of bonds and the bank's $10,000 cash. When private investigators later cornered him in Kansas City, he yet again sweet-talked his way out of trouble. This time out of court and possible jail time. Somehow, he convinced the bank that if they pressed charges, it would lead to a loss of confidence and a run that would ruin them. Not only did he convince the bank to drop all the charges, but he also somehow managed to get an extra $10,000 out of them in exchange for keeping silent. It was now 1925, and the Count was an impressively wealthy man. Indeed, it was dirty money, but to him, the end justified the means. Sure, he had suffered more than 40 arrests over his 35-year-old life, basically more than one arrest every year, but it was worth the luxurious lifestyle he never thought possible. Some would have called it quits by now, but not him. His greed and ambition had brought him this far, and now he had set his eyes on even higher things. We're talking as high as the Eiffel Tower. To him, the monumental landmark was essentially a sitting duck waiting to be milked. You see, the Eiffel Tower in Paris wasn't as immovable as it is today. Back then, many people saw it as an expensive eyesore that had to go. Constructed in 1889 for the then World Fair, it was meant to only stand for 20 years. However, by 1909, the Parisians had grown fond of their new landmark and were reluctant to let go despite its expensive maintenance costs. This whole saga gave Lustig a brilliant but equally crazy idea. In March 1925, the Count temporarily moved to Paris and set his plan in motion. First, he would use his vast underground contacts to forge the necessary credentials from the French Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs, responsible for the landmark. Next, he checked in at the luxurious Hôtel de Crillon in Paris, a fitting venue for any government official. From there, he contacted 5 of the biggest scrap dealers in the region. Of course, these dealers would have to keep the meeting secret to avoid public uproar from those who wanted to keep the Eiffel Tower. April soon rolled in, and so did 5 representatives from the scrap-dealing companies. Lustig, in spotless fluent French, opened the meeting by stating just how valuable the Eiffel Tower was to Parisians. However, he also expressed just how expensive its maintenance was and how, for the good of the city, it was better gone than standing. Slowly and delicately, he would then appeal to the professionals in the room by getting into the small details about the Eiffel Tower. To say he had done his homework was an understatement. The Count accurately mentioned the 15,000 beams and 2.5 million rivets that made the tower. He finally concluded his speech by quoting that of the 10,000 tons standing in front of them, the winning company would benefit from at least 7,000 tons of high-quality steel. As usual, he had a means to make his scam believable. Again, thanks to his underground contacts, he had several false access cards that allowed him and the 5 representatives to bypass the waiting crowds and go straight up the Eiffel Tower. He did all this while carefully observing his targets to identify his ideal mark. Instinctively, Lustig settled on one André Poisson, owner of the youngest scrap-dealing company in the Parisian scene, desperate to make a name for himself. Discreetly, he arranged for the 2 of them to meet without the others finding out. Immediately, Lustig expressed himself as a worn-out government official who, just like Poisson, was trying to make a name for himself. He hinted that if the business owner bribed him, he could guarantee the Eiffel Tower would fall onto his lap. Poisson was pleased. He was even more relieved that Lustig had asked for a bribe, which had been a common occurrence back in the day. And so, Poisson paid the Count $50,000 francs for the tower and an additional 20,000 francs as a bribe. The 2 shook hands to seal the deal, and as Poisson left, Lustig casually packed his bag, cashed his check, and moved into a local hotel in Austria. Over the days, the Count would wake up and catch the earliest newspaper on the state of affairs in Paris, expecting his scam to blow up. Surprisingly, there was nothing. It appeared André Poisson was so embarrassed that he didn't report the matter to the police. Lustig, seeing this, decided to dare fate and once again returned to Paris and successfully pulled the same stint. The only difference being that the victim this time reported the matter to the police. Fearing arrest, Lustig took the first flight to the United States, never again setting foot in Europe. For the next half-decade or so, the Count was relatively quiet, albeit for that one occasion when he famously ripped off the legendary Chicago mobster Al Capone, one of the most dangerous men in America. According to word on the street, Lustig approached the mob boss claiming to have devised a scam that could double his money in less than 2 months. Knowing the Count's reputation, Al Capone gave in and handed him $50,000. A month later, the Austrian would return deeply saddened that the scam had failed and that he had lost all his money. However, he would then explain that after selling off everything he owned, he had managed to return with the boss's money. Hearing this, Al Capone was so moved he let the Count keep $5,000. Of course, years later, Lustig revealed that he never lost the money. In fact, he had never invested in anything. He just let it sit at the bank for a month and showed up to collect $5,000 cash for nothing. He just scammed for fun. The year was 1930, and now backed with Al Capone's trust, the Count ventured into the big leagues. We're talking about organized crime. Specifically, he partnered with a Nebraska chemist called Tom Shaw, complete with plates, paper, and ink that reproduced the tiny red and green threads similar to real dollar bills. No, they didn't start small. Right from launch, they pushed at least $10,000 in counterfeit money per month. Also, unlike other counterfeiters who dealt with small denominations, Lustig and his accomplice went straight for the highly profitable $100 bill. It was go big or go home. One would think that such an operation would last 2 months tops. After all, the Secret Service at the time was quick to jump on anyone who even sniffed at fake currency. Surprisingly, the duo was sublime that their fake money came only second in quality to the real deal. Even Secret Service agents named them the Lustig-Shaw notes, the super notes of the era. 10 months later, the Count's illegal business threatened to wobble international confidence in the dollar. You see, not only were they producing more, but the quality kept getting better. Soon, even experienced bank tellers couldn't tell the difference. Some experts now worried Lustig and Shaw would disrupt America's monetary system. It also didn't help that, for the most part, the Count was basically invisible. Later that same year, Victor applied his textbook money-box scam and made away with a Texas sheriff's $50,000. When the sheriff later discovered he was scammed, he approached Lustig at gunpoint demanding compensation. Smoothly, the Count apologized for the inconvenience and agreed to repay his money, plus an additional $2,000. Weeks later, the sheriff was arrested in possession of counterfeit money. To his dismay, the Austrian had scammed him twice. Indeed, con men at the time were a common occurrence, but scamming the law took things to another level. It was such a concern that Lustig was landed in the sight of Secret Service agent Peter A. Rubano, a double-chinned Italian-American with sad eyes and never-ending ambition. He had recently made headlines for nabbing the notorious gangster Ignazio the Wolf Lupo, and for him, the infamous Austrian Count was next. The next 3 years or so would see the two play a game of cat and mouse, often coming within inches of one another. Rubano was always on the lookout, and Lustig made sure to always move around with a trunk of disguises. At a moment's notice, he could easily transform into a rabbi or a priest, and if cornered at a hotel, he would slither away dressed like a baggage man. It was now 1935. And the hunt for Victor Lustig was as frustrating as ever for the Secret Service. Some even started believing he was impossible to arrest. This was until the spring of that same year when the authorities received an anonymous tip of Lustig's whereabouts. A competitor, perhaps? A former business partner turned backstabber? Maybe his first wife, Roberta? No, the authorities would later reveal that May Schiebel was the most likely caller. According to insider accounts, Lustig cheated on his wife with his partner's mistress. Yes, Victor was having relations with Tom Shaw's lover. It's this entanglement that tightened his cuffs. On a New York street corner, on May 10, 1935, Lustig finally felt a tug on the velvet collar of his Chesterfield coat. A cold, hoarse voice then ordered, "Hands in the air." At first, the Secret Service agents couldn't believe it was him. They'd been shadowing him for 7 months, painstakingly trying to learn more about this mysterious and dapper man. But his newly grown mustache had thrown them off momentarily. Surrounded, Lustig smiled and calmly handed over his suitcase. "Smooth," was how one of the agents described him, noting a livid scar on his left cheekbone and dark, burning eyes. Under questioning, he was serene and poised. Agents expected the suitcase to contain freshly printed banknotes from various Federal Reserve series, or perhaps other tools of Lustig's million-dollar counterfeiting trade. But all they found were expensive clothes. Nevertheless, Rubano and his men were delighted to have cornered and arrested the most wanted con man in the United States and Europe. But little did they know that their joy wouldn't last. To make matters worse, Victor Lustig was the first to tell them that their prisons weren't enough to hold him. True to his words, on the last day of his trial in September 1935, the Count, dressed in prison-issue dungarees and slippers, tied together several bedsheets into a makeshift rope and shimmed his way down the 12-story supposedly escape-proof federal detention center in Manhattan. As he carefully lowered himself down the building side, he strategically pretended to be a window washer, casually wiping so it didn't look like he was escaping. Ending the show with a bow, the Count made a run for it, pleased with himself that he had left a cocky note under his pillow for the prison guards. Unfortunately for him, his hard-fought freedom didn't last long. He was arrested just 1 month later after his escape. For 9 blocks, 2 vehicles rode neck and neck, engines roaring. When Lustig's driver refused to stop, the agents rammed their car into his, locking their wheels together. Sparks flew. The vehicles crashed to a halt. The agents pulled their service weapons and threw open the doors. According to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Lustig told his captors, "Well, boys, here I am." This time, no amount of sweet talking could loosen his shackles, and he was sentenced to 20 years behind bars in the dreaded Alcatraz supermaximum security prison. Since then, not much was heard from him besides Warden's comment that he grew sadder as his calendar matched on. On some occasions, he would complain about an illness, but no one took him seriously. Eventually, on March 11, 1947, prisoner number 300, Count Victor Lustig, died of pneumonia-related complications. Like the boy who cried wolf, it turned out that one time he wasn't fooling around. He actually meant it. By then, he had made a staggering 1,192 medical requests and filled 507 prescriptions. That said, not many people, if any, knew about his death until 2 years after his passing, in August 1949, when his brother, Emil Lustig, announced it to the New York Times. Following this, the Alcatraz maximum security prison would then release his death certificate to the public. It turned out, his name was never Victor Lustig, but instead Robert V. Miller. This snowballed into a heap of questions as the public and media alike questioned who Victor Lustig was. And what of his brother? Who were they really? All in all, despite the whole identity saga, one thing was absolute. The world's most flamboyant con man was dead, and on his death certificate, a prison clerk listed apprentice salesman as the occupation of the individual who at one time was undoubtedly the world's king of con men. Here we reach the end of today's story. And as always, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. Also, comment below on what you'd like to see next. And for now, you can see this video. Until next time, stay safe and ciao.